So, as a reminder, the first precept, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I undertake the training to not destroy or harm other living beings and form the intention to bring forth compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and the environment. As we've repeatedly reminded ourselves as we've talked about the precepts, these are guidelines, not commandments. They're an orientation towards as opposed to strict rules. We train body, speech, and mind in the direction of non-harm and goodwill. The precepts help educate our hearts and bring our awareness into relationships and our interconnectedness with all beings and our environment, taking us out of our limited, small selves, out of little Lori, out of self-view and into a more spacious, non-self, anatta view of a more beneficial, wise presence. They help us cultivate wise behavior, wholesomeness, morality, ethical conduct, and to notice that not causing harm feels good. However, the precepts also, or maybe in addition to, the precepts also encourage us to notice that unwise, unskillful actions that cause harm have consequences too. And this brings in the concepts of Hiri and Ottappa, which are used in Buddhism and speak to how we develop discernment around practicing the precepts by understanding, seeing, and feeling the consequences, the harms that our actions might cause. Hiri can be interpreted as our internal sense of discomfort, often thought of as shame, regret, remorse, when we consider or actually do something harmful. The feelings we may be aware of when we've had an unkind thought, when we act out of anger, thoughtlessness, or greediness. Ottappa is a concern for the results of our actions, a more external oriented awareness. People might not like me if I do this. I may get punished. There may be karmic consequences. The Buddha called Hiri and Ottappa the bright guardians of the world, and stated, as long as these two states prevail in people's hearts, the moral standards of the world remain intact. When their influence wanes, the human world falls into unabashed harms and violence. And he recommended that we use these guidelines to embody, cultivate, and practice ahimsa or harmlessness, as the first precept recommends. This is intense importance of our practice. The precepts are certainly about our relationship, not just with ourselves, but with others, humans, animals, plants, minerals, our world, the space in which we live, and how we honor and protect these relationships, ourselves and all beings. In cultivating Hiri Ottappa, we practice honesty with ourselves. Practice noticing if our thoughts, intentions, and actions are harmful or beneficial. by feeling both the uplift, delight, the joy at beneficial behavior, as well as the distress of harmful actions, we use our embodied awareness to guide our choices. One question that's often suggested when we're thinking of whether we should or shouldn't do a behavior is, would I do this in front of my teachers or my benefactors? Would I toss this recyclable container in the general trash? Or would I go out of my way to find a recycling bin? Would I use this plastic water bottle, or would I make the effort to buy and use a reusable water bottle? This practice rests in our willingness to stay with the embodied experience of discomfort or distress created by any harmful actions. And this is how the first precept begins, if you notice. It says, aware of the suffering my behavior is creating. Awareness is the first step in practicing these precepts, noticing not just what I'm doing, but how it's landing. This bumps up against our natural aversion to feeling distress and discomfort. The mind automatically seems to want to generate excuses for any harmful behavior, rationalizations, minimizations. This is what our minds do. They try to protect us, even when this may not be the most helpful. And that's why it's so important that we practice creating a gentle, safe holding space, a place from which we can cultivate the capacity of being with and staying with distress so that we can notice it and give ourselves that big gold star, as Susan would say, for the noticing. I can practice staying with my distress while I notice my mind making up excuses and say, not helpful. I notice you excuses. Let me just let you go. Let me set you aside on the shelf, not now. And just staying with the bare truth of my actions, even when they're harmful, and the consequences that may result and the distress that may result. This doesn't mean that I get carried away in self-blame and castigation, beating myself up. No. Noticing my discomfort at harmful behavior allows me the space to deepen my capacity for empathy and compassion while I cultivate more wholesome and beneficial behavior. This isn't about just being a good little girl or being a good Buddhist or even just being politically correct, but it's about cultivating deeper empathy and compassion so that I can feel into and sense the harm that is caused by my actions and feel the discomfort, the dis-ease, the distress of that. This is rooted in respecting, honoring, and valuing all of life, mine and others. I can remember the practice of loving kindness and compassion toward myself. I hold myself kindly even when, or perhaps especially when, I have behaved harmfully, not absolving myself of responsibility or accountability, but acknowledging I'm an imperfect person who can learn from the discomfort of unskillful and harmful behavior. I don't try to push my discomfort out the door, but I do practice holding my distress, my regret, my remorse, my shame with kindliness and compassion so that I can learn that if I don't want to feel this distress in the future, maybe I don't want to behave in the ways that cause harm. Telling on myself, the other day I saw a large horde of ants. And notice how I framed that. A small community of ants was probably more like it. But these ants were on my patio in a group right next to the entrance into my house. And I felt a good bit of aversion. I took a moment and realized I had a choice here to decide what to do. I could go get the bug spray, or I could just leave the ants in peace, dealing with my own anxiety and stress about ants entering my house. Well, I gave in to my aversion and went right to the bug spray. After I sprayed and killed the ants, I was taken a bit aback by the extent and depth of the sadness, regret, and shame that I felt. The tightening of my heart, the clenching of my stomach. And I was also aware of regret at violating my own values by putting toxic chemicals into the environment. Now, these feelings weren't overwhelming, but they were clearly present and deeper than expected. And I also noticed my mind immediately trying to come to my rescue with all sorts of excuses and rationalizations. Well, they're only ants, as if that made a difference. You're choosing not to harm yourself by the chance of these ants coming into your kitchen and getting into all your food. And isn't that valid? All sorts of rationalizations. It's only once. It wasn't that much bug spray, and on and on. I was able to notice those excuses as not helpful in this moment. Thank you, my mind, for trying to protect and rescue me, but that's not really helpful to my overall well-being in this moment. Let me set you aside. And I was able to stay with just the acknowledgement of taking the lives of that community of ants and the pain and sorrow of that. And interestingly, I also felt into a deeper understanding that this act of harm was a step, perhaps a small step, but nonetheless a step toward larger harms happening in the world, of one group killing another and rationalizing their actions, and feeling into, if I numb myself and make excuses for harming ants, that only makes it a bit easier for me to numb out to and rationalize harming other beings, people in our world, the environment of our world. And any step is too much of a step, even the smallest step. Again, as the first precept states, we form the intention to bring forth compassion. And any step that keeps me from compassion is a step too far. And learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and the environment. Inviting the Brahma Viharas of loving kindness and compassion, as well as the practice of forgiveness, to come forth. I practiced holding my heart tenderly without pushing away my distress. I'm imperfect and fallible and make mistakes, as do we all. I'm part of our common humanity. And I can learn from this distress to more diligently, conscientiously practice harmlessness in the future. As I practice this compassionate awareness for the ants I had killed and of my distress at causing harm, I also noticed a bit of gladness and gratitude for the practice that allowed me to hold all of this and the capacity to cultivate the presence of the bright guardians of Hiri Ottappa in my heart for the well-being of myself, all beings, and the world. So thank you so very much for your generous attention. And let's practice giving ourselves space to hold our hearts kindly. So as usual, creating space by opening up our hearts and our bodies in whatever way is best for you, honoring whatever limitations you may have with movement, but moving to soften, loosen, unknot, release any tension, gentle stretches that open and bring comfort, the arms, shoulders, neck, perhaps some head rolls or shoulder rolls, feeling into a place of just a bit more ease and comfort. Gentle twisting to one side and then another, along with breathing in and breathing out, feeling into the release of constriction, tightness, tension in our bodies. And coming in for a landing, inviting our attention to focus inward rather than outward. Perhaps closing eyes or letting your gaze become gentle and soft. Allowing the mind to rest in the flow of breathing. Maybe with a few deeper than usual breaths. And noticing perhaps the automatic settling down of the body with a deep breath out. Savoring whatever bit more of comfort and ease is accessible in this moment, in just this next breath. Just breathing ease and loving kindness into any discomfort or distress. Perhaps dropping in a sprinkle more of gratitude for the awareness of the beneficial presence of all of us sitting here together and alone, alone and together.